On May 14, 2018, at 5:30 a.m., the crew of Sichuan Airlines Flight 8633 arrived early at Chongqing Jiangbei International Airport, preparing for their journey to Lhasa Gonggar Airport in Tibet. The flight would be operated by an Airbus A319, which had already logged 19,900 flight hours and 12,920 takeoff and landing cycles. On board this flight were 119 passengers and 9 crew members. The captain was 46-year-old Liu Chuanjian, assisted by 27-year-old First Officer Xu Ruichen and 33-year-old Relief Captain Liang Peng. At 6:27 a.m. local time, Flight 8633 received clearance to taxi, with an estimated arrival in Gonggar about 2 hours later. At 6:42 a.m., just 15 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft entered Chengdu's air traffic control zone and established two-way communication. The crew was instructed to climb to a cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. As planned, the relief captain, who would take over for the return leg, left the cockpit to rest. The second half of Flight 8633's route would cross the vast and unforgiving Tibetan Plateau, the largest and highest plateau in the world. With an average elevation of 14,800 feet spanning the Himalayas and even Mount Everest, the region posed enormous challenges for any flight. The air is thin, oxygen is scarce, and the weather is notoriously unpredictable. Even though Captain Liu had flown this route more than 100 times, he remained cautious. At 7:07:05 a.m., as the aircraft neared the edge of the Tibetan Plateau, disaster struck. A crack suddenly appeared in the right cockpit windshield, splitting directly across the center. It was an extremely rare and dangerous situation. The captain immediately instructed the first officer to consult the flight manual for emergency procedures. Despite his experience, Xu had never faced anything like this before. The crew's first task under standard procedures was to assess the severity of the crack. Captain Liu carefully reached forward and touched the windshield to gauge its depth. What he found was alarming. The crack had already penetrated the middle layers of the glass, compromising its ability to withstand pressure and threatening the structural integrity of the aircraft. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Captain Liu contacted Chengdu Air Traffic Control to report the issue and prepare for a potential emergency. But before any action could be taken, a deafening bang shattered the tense cockpit atmosphere. The entire right windshield suddenly exploded outward, sending shards of glass flying. Some pieces struck the engine, while the massive pressure difference between cockpit and cabin caused an explosive decompression. In an instant, the first officer was violently sucked halfway out of the cockpit, his upper body dangling in the freezing, rushing wind, kept from being completely pulled out only by his harness. The plane was still traveling at an astonishing 432 knots, at nearly 32,000 feet. The decompression happened in seconds. A hurricane-force wind roared into the cockpit, with temperatures plunging to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The first officer struggled against the freezing cold and crushing wind pressure, his face twisted in pain as he fought to survive. For Captain Liu, the situation had escalated into a full-scale emergency. With one hand, he gripped the side stick tightly, fighting to keep the violently shaking aircraft under control. With the other, he reached for his co-pilot, desperately trying to pull him back inside. The deafening wind and unrelenting suction made every movement a near-impossible struggle. Inside the cabin, chaos erupted. The sudden decompression ripped open overhead compartments, sending luggage and debris flying through the air. Passengers screamed in terror, clinging to their seats as the aircraft shuddered violently. The Airbus A319 systems began to fail one by one. The autopilot disengaged. Alarms blared across the cockpit displays as error messages flashed continuously. Then the plane began to spiral out of control, shaking violently before suddenly nosediving. The nose pitched down more than 50 degrees, the aircraft spinning and plummeting at an astonishing rate of 9,800 feet per minute. Through the cockpit windows, the towering peaks of the Tibetan Plateau grew rapidly closer. The throttle was unresponsive. The Airbus A319 continued its uncontrolled dive, leaving Captain Liu with only seconds to act.